Hey guys, welcome back to the Fishing Teacher, and appreciate you guys joining me for today's episode. You know, one of the things that I talk about a lot on the channel is how you need to focus more on like bass mood and personality and seasonal patterns and seasonal movements of fish over like the flashy lure color or the latest lure. If you're wanting to become a better bass angler, you really have to discipline yourself to learning more about the bass and becoming a student of the bass. I know this is boring. I know a lot of people don't want to hear it because it's not any fun, but nevertheless, guys, if you're interested in really improving your fishing success, this is one of the things that's going to do it. And I want to talk a little bit about today pertaining to that, sort of this seasonal progression and the change that a bass makes in the post-spawn period. You know, at the time of filming this video, we're in the second week of May. We're winding down the spawn in most parts of the country. If you're up north, you know, it's just getting started, and there's still some spawning going on here and there, but for the most part, we've entered the post-spawn phase, you know, in a lot of lakes across the country. And I want to talk about what happens during this period to give you an idea what to look for and the type of areas you need to be fishing. So we'll get into that today's episode here. Also, guys, a couple quick things here we get started to keep the channel on YouTube. Just a quick invitation, guys. I'd like to invite everybody to please hit that subscribe button or consider subscribing here to the Fishing Teacher. Free and easy to do so. If you subscribe, guys, and comment on the videos and hit the like button, and especially, guys, there's that thing that says hype. If you hype the videos with that little hype button, you're allowed to do that 3 times a week on YouTube. That really pushes the video out, and really appreciate that. And also, guys, thank you very much for everybody that has been using all the links I put in every video description. If you need anything like tackle, I've got all the links in my video description that you can use that helps the channel out and get your gear as well. So really appreciate that. Okay, here's the foundational change that you have with bass into the post spawn. And of course, you have to take a little bit this with a grain of salt because there's always exceptions to the rule. When you're talking about seasonal movements, there's a ton of variations. It's like it depends if you're a man-made impoundment or if you're a natural lake or a river system, something like that. It depends if you're a tidal system. It depends on your water clarity, water level. There's a lot of things that can affect this post-spawn period. But I sort of want to give you like an overall gist of it that you can sort of apply to your lake to some extent. But this is especially, you know, geared for your typical man-made impoundments. Now, what happens is like throughout the course of the year during the spawn phase is the most complex time of bass fishing because you've got the pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn phase. And it's not just cut and dried. It's like, you can't say that like, oh, the bass are in the pre-spawn or the bass are spawning or all the bass are in the post-spawn, because they're not. It's like bass will do this over a long period of time. I've seen bass here in Missouri even spawning in late June before, and I've seen them spawning early as March. So you're talking about what the majority of the fish are doing. There's always exceptions to the rule, so that's one thing you have to remember. But we're just going to talk about what the general population of the fish are doing. Okay, here's what happens after the fish that get done spawning, especially earlier in the pre-spawn or the post-spawn like we are now. The fish, when they get done spawning, the females will leave the area pretty soon. Like almost as soon as they get done laying the eggs, they're going to be out of there. And they do a variety of things. Some of them hang around in the spawning area for a little bit. Some of them swim out a little bit deeper. Some of them immediately go out deeper. Some of them immediately go out and suspend. Just depends on the individual fish. And then you have the males will hang around and guard the fry for a couple weeks. And then after that, they start their own, you know, migration, whether it be hanging around, feeding a little bit shallow or moving out deep or whatever. You have several different type of populations of fish in the post-spawn. Number one, you have a population of bass in the post-spawn, depending upon what phase of the post-spawn it is, that do not leave the spawning areas. Let's say, for example, you have a big cove where you've seen fish bedding at and you know they're spawning at, you know, during the prime period of the spawn. There is a percentage of the bass, and I'm going to put that percentage of the bass at probably 30 to 40% probably, in most cases, that do not leave that spawning cove. They're going to stay there pretty much like the whole month of May. If they're going to stay there for 2 to 4 weeks after they get done spawning, and they're there basically to feed on whatever they can get shallow. They can feed on crawdads, they can feed on perch, they can feed on shad. A lot of shad spawn in the springtime of the year in May, so they're up there feeding on shad. Snakes in the water, frogs in the water, whatever. There's a lot of food that is shallow in May, so 35-40% of the bass are going to be right there in those type of areas that the fish were spawning in. Another 30% of the fish or something like that are going to swim out of that spawning area to the nearest like deep water access to that spawning area. So let's say, for example, if you got a nice point leading into a spawning cove, those fish, a lot of them will swim out and they'll hang out on that point for 3 or 4 weeks. Or they may go to the nearest bluff bank outside of the spawning area or the nearest steeper bank, and they're going to hang out there until it starts to get into the traditional summertime pattern. So you actually have 3 different, types of fish that are moving out of those type of areas. And if you have a river type lake, like, say for example, a TVA lake, like Lake Chickamauga, Guntersville, Kentucky Lake, those fish, when they get done spawning, will move out to those main river ledges almost immediately. So everything's a little bit different. Therefore, when you're talking about post-spawn fishing, you have to really focus on the type of fish that you want to catch. Now, if I want to concentrate on those fish that stayed in the spawning area, I usually go in there and like one of my first choices is like a topwater lure. I'll cover water with the topwater in those areas. A swim jig is really good. Catch a lot of fish on a swim jig. Depending upon the cover and the water clarity, like a square bill crankbait can be good. A swim bait, a glide bait. These fish are actively feeding, and a lot of times they want a little bit bigger lures. That's why if those fish are in that shallow water during like May and into early June, you can catch them on the bigger power lures. Again, your crankbaits, your topwaters, all that type of stuff is going to work pretty good. And another thing with that is the type of day is dependent upon your water clarity in terms of the technique you want to use and how good it's going to be. If you're fishing in a stained body of water lake, it doesn't really matter what the conditions are. It can be sunny or whatever, and you can still catch them. But if you're fishing in a clear water lake, those fish that are in that shallow water are going to always bite better earlier or late in the day or on low light days. So that's just a lot of variables with that. The other type of fish I look for is I love fishing secondary points during the post-spawn. This is one of my favorite ways to catch them. I've caught tons of good fish doing that. And my favorite techniques for fishing the secondary points in the post-spawn would be dragging a football head jig, dragging a wobble head jig, and fishing a deep diving crankbait. Those are my 3, powerhouses, especially if that water visibility is, anywhere between like 2 to 4 foot. If it's really clear, a walking topwater on those points can be really good, or a wake bait, and that can be good all day long. A lot of those fish, after they spawn, they get out there on those deep points if the water's clear, and it's a great way to catch them on topwater with that. Same with like the bluff banks and the steeper banks. But the main thing is these fish, they have a predictable progression on where they go, the majority of them, that is, and you just sort of have to follow them. Now, what happens as it gets more into the summertime, when you actually leave like what is considered the post-spawn phase, and you start to get to the point where your water temperatures are within 5 degrees of their hottest point all year long, that's when you have a tremendous dispersion in the fish. So the fish that are in the shallow spawning areas, they're going to be gradually moving out there to deeper water. You're going to have fewer and fewer of those. You're going to have fewer and fewer of those bass sitting up on those secondary points, and you're going to have a lot of fish that are moving out deeper, and they're going to suspend above the thermocline, or they're going to be on structures just above the thermocline level. So the thermoclines usually start forming like in July or something in a lot of lakes across the country, and once those thermoclines start forming, you're going to have bass either on the bottom and 25 foot of depth or less, and you're going to have a lot of fish suspended. And then you're going to have some fish that are still in those spawning areas, and they live in those spawning areas all summer, and they're bluegill feeders. But it's the smaller and smaller percentage all the time. A lot of those fish that like to live in shallow water, as you start to get into the later post spawn in the early summer, they gravitate towards the most dirty water in the lake. So if you've got a bass that's living on the mid-lake portion down there, and it's one of those bass that likes to stay shallow, a lot of times they may swim up into the upper river part of the lake or the upper creek tributary to get into that more shallow water where the feeding opportunities are more conducive as it gets warmer. So anyway, guys, that's just a few tips for fishing the post spawn. Hope it helps you catch some, and we'll check in later.